When's the last time you talked about comparing and contrasting and didn't use a Venn diagram? Venn diagrams and comparing and contrasting just seem to go together, don't they? But it's not the only way. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5, and this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. Before we talk about some of the activities you can use to help your students with comparing and contrasting, let's chat about the benefits of learning to compare and contrast. Comparing and contrasting is an evaluating tool. It helps students analyze a text. Our goal is that students can see differences and details within the text, and they can find similarities within the text as well, whether they're comparing and contrasting books, a book to a movie, characters, settings, real animals to animals in the book, or anything else that you can think of. It doesn't matter. We're getting students to focus on some details. Not only does this help students dig deeper into a text, it also improves their memory of what they've read. This improves their comprehension. It's drawing attention to important details. It's making abstract details more concrete. It's clarifying their thinking. And comparing and contrasting is not just something that we do at school. We compare and contrast in life as well. Think about buying a car. You weigh the pros and cons. You compare and contrast different models, vehicles, all kinds of things. We make a lot of decisions by comparing and contrasting. So in fact, comparing and contrasting is actually a decision-making skill as well. And comparing and contrasting is also related to making connections. We talk about connections from text to self, text to text, and text to world. Well, you have to be able to compare in order to make those kinds of connections, don't you? And just one more little tidbit for you. Marzano's research in the Art and Science of Teaching in 2007 showed that analyzing by comparing similarities and differences leads to big gains in student achievement overall. Why? Well, it's a comprehension skill. This helps students learn how to dig deep. This particular skill is the gateway to deeper analytical thinking. All right, so let's talk activities. First off, what kinds of things do I use to teach students about comparing and contrasting? Well, I use books, I use pictures, I use movies, songs, setting, characters, problems, all kinds of pieces of a book, and lots of other pieces as well. I particularly love to start teaching comparing and contrasting with pictures or objects. This is a super easy way for students to learn to compare and contrast. It's concrete. They can see it. They can touch it. It's something that they can completely grasp before you start moving into a more abstract realm of books. Sometimes in books, things aren't as clear. You have to make more inferences. We have to really dig deep in words. It's just harder. So being able to do something that's right in front of them, that's an image or an object, is a great way to start to refine the skill, and then they can move on to apply that to a text. Now, when we think about comparing and contrasting, I bet the very first thing that comes to mind is the Venn diagram. It's easy. It works. It's a great tool, and we all use it, and we should use it. So imagine comparing two books that are similar stories, two different Three Little Pigs stories, for example. You could use a Venn diagram and certainly project that onto a screen and work together on it, or you can put hula hoops on the floor and use index cards or post-it notes and have students help you with it that way. It depends on how concrete you want to be. If you have very young students, the more concrete, the better. If you have older students and they pretty much have this skill, you're just doing a little refreshing, then you can afford to be a little more abstract. However, there's other tools that you can use besides just the Venn diagram. You can use a T-chart, or you can use a 3-column chart for comparing and contrasting. This can be with a worksheet. It can be done whole class up on the board. There's lots of ways to use a T-chart. I like to use a T-chart or a 3-column chart in the beginning up on the board or on big chart paper and have students write down their own pieces to it on Post-it notes and then come up and add their piece to the chart. It's a great way to involve everyone, and then you can have a whole discussion about what fits, what doesn't fit, and why. It's a great segue into students being able to take a chart that's similar and working on their own with different elements of the story. If you're using pictures or objects to start, students can sort the images or objects into similar or different. A great way to use images or objects is to do this in small groups. Give every group a set of images or objects, and then give them two labels, similar and different. Then have the students sort the images or objects by placing them in groups based on their similarities or differences and explain their decisions. It's a very simple way to jump into comparing and contrasting and starting to work on the academic vocabulary that goes along with that. The students can do the same thing with a T-chart or a 3-column chart. They can do it with a Venn diagram. You can shift and work on these things over and over and over again, swap images between your groups, and give your students different tools or graphic organizers to work with so that they get used to using these tools. Another tool is the double bubble map. Now, this one is one that a lot of teachers shy away from, but it actually can be quite helpful if you know how to use it. In the two main circles, you write down what you're comparing. Maybe you're comparing two characters, so you put one character's name in one circle and the other character's name in the other circle. The outside 3 circles on each side are for the differences, and the circles in the very center between the two main circles are for all of the similarities. It's a very visual way for students to sort. Some students really like a double bubble map. Giving your students lots of tools and different kinds of tools is helpful because then they can choose the one that speaks to their brain best. Some examples of other things that you can compare and contrast. Imagine comparing characters. Maybe you're comparing wolves out of 2 or 3 different stories. So maybe you're taking the 3 little pigs, Little Red Riding Hood, and maybe the story Wolf. And you're going to compare all 3 wolves from these stories. I think that this is a really interesting activity for students because students can pick up on the differences in each of these stories quite easily. Each wolf is distinctly different, and that makes it really easy for students to be able to start separating what the differences are and what the similarities are. I mean, obviously, they're all wolves, right? So they have wolf-like characteristics. But each wolf acts and does things differently, and that differentiates them. Or you can get real. Maybe you're going to take one of those stories, take a look at the wolf in the story, and compare that to real wolves. How do real wolves act? What are real wolves like? What's the difference, and what are the similarities between this wolf and the story? Perhaps you're going to do a book and then a movie. Take Charlotte's Web or Stuart Little. They both have movie versions. You start with reading the book. When you're done with the book, you watch the movie version. Then your students can compare and contrast the book version versus the movie version. If that's too much for your students, you can boil it down to comparing the main characters in each version, or the setting in each version, or some other element in the story. As always, start your teaching whole class and work together as a group to really understand each of the tools and what comparing and contrasting actually is. And you can separate the skills out even further if you want by doing comparing only sometimes and contrasting only sometimes, and then putting them together. So there's lots of ways to scaffold this so that your students can do this in a way that's accessible for them. Once you've done whole group teaching, comparing and contrasting really lends itself to small group work. This is a great way for students to be able to talk and discuss and really think deeper about how to compare and contrast different elements of a story. And then moving to individual work, whether that's in centers or at seat work, this is the perfect time for students to really give it a go and see what they really understand before you decide if they're ready to move on or not. One last way that you can do comparing and contrasting is through framed sentences. You can give yourself sentence frames in order to be able to discuss their comparing and contrasting. I really like doing this before students move into their small group work, because if they have framed sentences that they can use to be able to communicate with each other, you're going to get better discussions out of those groups. In addition, those groups will stay more focused on the task at hand. And yes, I have a freebie for you. I know that's shocking. I have 2 compare and contrast charts, a 2-column and a 3-column chart that you can use with your students. So if you want to grab that, there will be a link in the show notes for that. And as always, you can grab all the freebies in the vault that you want. That link will be in the show notes as well. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in. And for those of you who have taken the time to post a review, email me your thoughts or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in the episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.